Welcome to our session hosted by the UMass Amherst Alumni Association. Today's session is Making an Impression, Resumes and Virtual Interviewing Q&A. Thank you for joining us tonight. To introduce first the team that's behind the scenes. So my name is Karen Schultz-Battistoni. I'm the Director of Alumni Volunteer Relations, and I'm going to be here to moderate the Q&A and to bring your questions from the chat box forward to our speakers today. With me is Megan Hoyo, class of 2007. She's the Director of Alumni and University Programs, and Megan will also be helping to monitor the chat box and assisting with any technical issues that you might have. So to connect with us during this session, please go ahead and use the chat box in the bottom of the toolbar on your Zoom viewer. You can also raise your hand if you want to indicate that you have a question or to get our attention in the chat box as well. Anything that you submit in the chat box, you can submit to everybody, or you can just send it to all of the panelists, and you get to decide that when you're chatting in the box. Tonight's session is being recorded. By participating in tonight's session, you are consenting to be part of a recorded session. So just bear that in mind. We are going to be asking your questions, but we won't be giving names with all of the questions that are submitted. We'll just be bringing the questions themselves forward. After the session is recorded, we will send it out for closed captioning, and then we will add this session to our video library, and it will be accessible to you and to others also on our YouTube channel. So we are going to welcome our panelists today, and I'm going to give you a few more details. So the format of today's session is a Q&A. So all of you, when you registered, there was an opportunity to submit questions. So we took those questions, and those are the questions we're going to start off the session with today. And then the remainder of the session we'll have for all of the questions that you submit in the chat box. So we hope that you'll submit some to our two panelists. We acknowledge that right now we are in an unprecedented time, and that many people are going through many different things in regards to the job search and their family lives and their work lives because of the COVID-19. So we acknowledge that all of that is an additional component to our lives right now. And we thank you for making time to join us for tonight's session. So without further ado, I want to welcome our two panelists. Patricia Hunt-Cynical, class of 1986, is the CEO of First Beacon Group, LLC. And Wayne Schofield, class of 1985, is the senior recruiter at NREL Green Power, and he also runs Night and Day Resume. So welcome to Patty and Wayne, and now we'll have everybody pull up their cameras and we'll get started with your questions. All right. All right, so the first question then to start out, and when you answer your first question, Patty and Wayne, if you could just give us a few details about your background, that'll help people to get to know you a little bit more. So the first question is for Patty. Can you talk a little bit about the best way to navigate the job search during this difficult time?
Sure. First, I want to give a quick thank you to Karen and Megan and Wayne for collaborating on this, and UMass Alumni Association for sponsoring it, because I think this is an incredible event and series of events that they've invested in. So thank you. Quick overview of who I am. I'm an 86 grad of UMass Amherst. I've been in the HR field, since I graduated in 86, which seems in some like crazy world like over 30 years ago. I did an MBA at Babson, and about 20 years ago I started my own firm, and we do a wide range of HR functions for typically small to mid-sized companies, but a lot of what we do is recruitment, search, and placement. And then I also write a column for the Boston Globe called the Job Doc column. So I'm going to tackle this first question: what's the best way to navigate the job search during this difficult time? I think some of my advice, and I'll ask Wayne to chime in too, is that a strong professional network is absolutely essential in good times and bad times and up times and down times. I always say I have 2 addictions. My first addiction is to coffee. My second one is to LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn probably 5 to 7 days a week here. So, I would definitely encourage you, especially in this virtual world, to invest in working on your LinkedIn profile, making sure there's a decent photo there, making sure that your LinkedIn profile has keywords embedded in it so recruiters like us can find you. And attending events like this. Wayne, anything that you want to add to that?
I think that's great advice, Patty. So the networking, on LinkedIn, a resume lives basically. So whatever's on your resume should be on your LinkedIn profile. They should be, synonymous with each other. And I'm coffee and LinkedIn as well. And most recruiters are. There's a few things that in the job search. I know that some folks have spoken about when I send my resume, all I do is get automated. Folks don't see my resume, and that's not necessarily the case. So when you send your resume, assume you're sending it to a person, make it personalized, and and in this difficult time, feel free to follow up. Feel free to let people know in your network that you're actually looking for a job, and that's going to be helpful. 2 out of my last 3 jobs have been from people that I've known for more than 20 years, and so networking is key. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Karen, did you want to move on to the next question?
Yep. So the next question is about resume writing resources through UMass alumni. And Megan, if you can just let me pull my camera up, then it won't be as weird to just hear my voice, but I'll start talking. So through the UMass Alumni Association, we do have several different opportunities available for resume help. All right, so you can access, can everybody hear me? Okay, now it says I'm unmuted. So we have career counselors, and career counselors are 6 alumni. Wayne is one of our career counselors who work with alumni for different resources and areas of the job search process and preparation, and resume is one of them. So you can meet with one of our career counselors. Our career counselors, the first session is totally free. Additional sessions, you get a UMass discounted rate for alumni, so that's a great resource. We also have an online platform called Alumni Advisors, where you can connect with alumni from many different regions that are located all over the world for them to look at your resume, to give you resume feedback. They can also do LinkedIn feedback, mock interviews, and other things. And then we also have different resources and tools. So if you go to umassalumni.com/career, that will lead you to all the different career resources, including the video library. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Patty then for the next question. Is hiring someone to do your resume the best route? What's your advice?
You know what, I do think it is helpful to have a fresh perspective, especially if you have not done a resume in a very long time. So a fresh set of eyes to look at it, to make sure it has a contemporary feel. My greatest horror story about resumes is I had a neighbor who hadn't done a resume in 25 years. And it was a laborious task to get her a resume, because it was really sort of going back and checking dates and adding bullets and what about this, and oh, I forgot about this. I mean, I'll tell you what I do every January. I look at my LinkedIn profile and I look at my resume, even though I've been self-employed for 20 years. I think it's a good habit to sort of keep it fresh. I do think it's worth, having someone take a look at it, and in some cases hiring someone to review your resume. And Wayne, maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Well, I'm absolutely biased because I've been running night and day resume for 9 years. Excuse me. We have clients in 48 states and have had over 1,400 clients. So I'm absolutely biased, but I feel like somebody should at least reach out to a resume writing service to get an assessment. And that's why we have a free resume review link right on the website. It's absolutely no obligation. You're not going to get spammed. Nothing comes to you other than some helpful advice. And I would say maybe 1 out of every 6 or 7 people who emails us, they get some advice and then they'll want to use our service. I will tell you from the recruiter side of me, not just Night and Day Resume, but on a daily basis, because I didn't really introduce myself, but I've had 3 careers. I started off in broadcasting, 10 years on the radio in Boston. And then I had a marketing and advertising agency. I sold that and got into recruiting almost 27 years ago. So I've been that multiple career person who's transitioned. And that seems to be the type of person that comes and looks for some advice. I need some help with my resume to make it look appealing to the applicant tracking system, whatever it may be. But absolutely an extra set of eyes, and the formatting is very, very critical. Content, absolutely important, but if it's formatted incorrectly, as recently as last week, I received a resume and there was no name on it because the formatting through the ATS had purged it. So you really have to keep it simple. Absolutely.
Okay. So that takes us to the next question, Wayne. Can you talk a little bit about industry or profession-specific resume rules and advice? And then to piggyback off of that question that came in through the chat box is, should you still have an objective on your resume?
So great question. First, I'll speak to the objective. An objective should be on there for somebody who, I'll say yes. There's always an exception, but an objective should be included on a resume with a summary. We, at the top of Night and Day Resumes, we put a summary section. So it's a 15-second elevator pitch, and that it includes your objective. It's maybe 3 sentences long, and it's an introduction. I just had a conversation with a client yesterday. He's out of law school, he's done some consulting, and he sent me his resume. We've got our consult tomorrow, and his resume just like starts. There's no introduction. And I said, it's just like throwing your resume down, and you don't say, hello, nice to meet you. My name's Bob. I'm looking for a job. No pun intended. but you need a summary with an objective included, absolutely. And that'll be customized to whichever role you're applying to. And speaking of whichever role you're applying to, the original question, are there industry specific? Yes, if you're an engineer, somebody who's technical, you should include a technical summary. And then you can break that down into programming languages, operating systems, platforms, whatever it may be. And if you're a medical professional, make sure you put all your certifications on there. I always suggest with regards to education, it should be at the top of your resume for up to 5 years from when you've matriculated. And then after that, you're selling your professional experience, so your education goes down towards the bottom. So,
good advice. I like the summary. I like the summary too. I am less sort of sold on the objective. I like the summary for a couple of selfish reasons, because, and we're going to talk about applicant tracking systems, it's another way to embed some keywords in your resume. So hopefully you'll sort of get picked up if a hiring manager is searching and they're using specific keywords. It's another sort of trick to get more hits on your resume and for you to rise to the top of that search.
So Patty, that's a great point. I just want to chime in. You say the keywords, and everybody focuses on keyword search. I call it, for a 9-day resume, I call it buzzword density. So I can't tell you how many people will put Microsoft Office skills. And you almost have to assume that if you're sending your resume to a company, that it could be a recruiter who's brand new recruiter, or somebody who's an office admin who's looking for the resume. And if they're searching for Excel or PowerPoint, and you just put Microsoft Office, it's not going to get found. So I always suggest, be clear. Don't worry about brevity. The age-old question, is a one-page resume really something that's, that I should do? And I said, not since the 1980s. So don't worry about the length of a resume.
Okay. Next question. So Patty, would you recommend a job seeker adjust their resume for every different job they intend to apply for? I know often this is something people are trying to figure out, how specific, and do they do a whole new one every time, or can I just keep sending that same one out?
You know, I think in this day and age with, so I remember when I graduated UMass, like you literally used like a typesetter. You went to a printing company and used a typesetter. I know I'm dating myself. In this day and age, when it should be a little bit easier to make revisions to a resume, I think it's perfectly fine to revise a summary, to you know, change if you have, say, if you look at a job description and you really think it's a good fit for you, and maybe they have something as the first bullet in the job description and it's buried down in your resume, to move it up. I don't think you can make a wholesale change on sort of who you are and fabricate things, but I think you can certainly highlight things that maybe would be more attractive to an employer or make you a more viable candidate for that job, for sure.
Mhm.
Okay, great. The next question is for Wayne. Any advice for resumes when you're making a career shift to a new field? You're changing fields.
Mhm.
And then specifically, we have someone that indicated that they're looking at some different operations management and customer support skills that they have, and they're trying to transition into project management. So how to, you know, kind of take some of those transferable skills, even if they don't necessarily have the exact pieces as the job description lays it out, but they believe I have the ability. So how do you work on that?
So this kind of folds right into the previous question: is, should a resume be customized for each role? Excuse me, and I agree with Patty, it absolutely should be, for exactly this reason. The person who asked about operations, customer support, rolling into project management, what I try and find is, what are the common characteristics, the common traits of somebody who's in operations management that are also going to be in project management? And then I say, okay, you know, you're overseeing a budget, or you're overseeing people. And now as a project manager in whatever it may be, aerospace, you know, literally whatever it may be, we need to just highlight that. So it might have only been 25 or 30% of your previous job's responsibilities in operations or, you know, customer support, but now you want that to be 75, 80% of that job. You know, you're not overstating it, you're just highlighting it more. So that comes to the top of that section of your job. So now the person sees all the project management responsibilities you had, right? Because I always tell people you can't really fight your personality. So if somebody's doing operations and customer support, their personality probably lends right into project management. You just need to take that step, find the common thread, find the bridge that gets you from there, you know, here to there. And that's exactly why, you know, showing your resume to your cousin or your uncle, they may not necessarily be able to help you build up that to put on your resume.
And I would say, like, just this week, we talked to a candidate and for IT director in Cambridge, and one of the things that has really impressed our client is he has an undergraduate degree, but he also has a PMP certificate, which was not required of his current role, and he sort of took it upon himself to take that course and you know, or you know, take courses toward that got him that certification. So that might be something that you want to think about doing if you're sort of serious of taking your operations management, customer support skills, and really looking at more of a project management role.
Okay.
I saw, Karen, I saw a chat come in that I just wanted to address just very quickly. Somebody asked
Sure.
a question. It just came in and it said, I think it was from John, and he said, for an older person, should I do a functional resume versus a you know, normal reverse chronological resume?
Chronological, yeah.
And I would say absolutely never, because in all my 27 years of recruiting, whenever somebody has a functional resume, all it says is I have something to hide. and it's never failed me. So functional resume just literally says I have something to hide, and it's not helpful. If there's some gaps, John, if there's, or anybody else thinking about functional resume, if there's some gaps in your resume, it's perfectly fine. Own up to it. You know, if it's age, which we all, you know, have the question about age discrimination, it's perfectly fine. I think, you know, a couple of my last 4 jobs in the last 10 years or so have been because of my level of experience, because of my age. They needed somebody who's seasoned to run a team, to grow a group, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, don't hide behind it. We all get seasoned. You know, and if you're, you know, in your mid 50s like I am, and you misrepresent your resume, and I do feel like it's misrepresenting, you only have the last 10 years, and you walk into, you know, or have a conversation like, oh shoot, this isn't the 30-year-old person that I expected. You can still do the job, but unfortunately the age discrimination is out there. So, you know, I'll leave it at that. But functional resume, sorry, no, nay, never.
Yeah, I would.
Patty, what is your view on that? Yeah.
I was going to say, I probably don't have as strong opinion as Wayne, but I agree with him. So, you know, I think most of us are just used to, you know, the chronological resume, and that's what we're most comfortable with. And it does feel like when someone presents a functional resume that, I mean, you still try to, and I do this, and hiring managers do this, you still sort of try to piece it. So, okay, well, where were they at this time? And where were they then? And you're sort of trying to rebuild like that chronological resume in your head. And I would agree with Wayne that, I mean, age discrimination does exist. You know, we get the question all the time, you know, should I only include the last 10 or 15 years on my resume? And I'll always say, okay, so when you walk in, they're gonna know you're not 32. You know, I think you are who you are. And I've seen both sides of it. I've seen, you know, I've heard clients say to us, yes, we want someone young and cheap. And then I've also heard clients say, just recently we had a client say, we want someone with a few gray hairs because we're not going to babysit anyone anymore. And I always go back to, how about if we hire sort of the most qualified person, and the person that does the job best, or that we're sort of betting can do the job best. So I think it goes both ways, but I think if you don't do the chronological resume, you know, the reader tries to sort of build a chronology in your, you know, from what they're given. So I think that's a struggle.
Yep. All right. The next question, I think, really lends itself to where we are kind of right now with the economy and with hiring. So this one's for Patty. If I have an offer rescinded, maybe it was an internship, a job, or a promotion at my current company due to COVID-19, can I mention that on my resume because I got further down the line than someone who didn't have all of those offers or possibilities? So how should I handle that?
I'm not sure if I would mention it on the resume. People are gonna know. I mean, Wayne and I are both seeing a lot of resumes where it says, you know, end date is March 2020. And it doesn't sort of take a rocket scientist to sort of figure out what, I would say 80% of those separations are because of sort of this pandemic. So I don't think you necessarily have to call it out. I would probably explain it more so in a cover letter or a cover email. I'm not sure if the resume is the best place to sort of explain that. And I'd ask Wayne for him to chime in to see if he agrees or has a different perspective.
I agree 100%. And I would suggest that if somebody's going to interview, you know, or have a conversation, you know, try not to be, you know, show that you're upset about it. It's trying times, difficult times out there. Try not to come across as sour, you know, but just state like it was unfortunate and then kind of move on, because sometimes people get hung up on negative and you just don't want to do that. There's a lot out there. So just try and be as positive as possible. And you know, I said the same thing about maybe on a resume for somebody who was chosen for an internship, like a student chosen for an internship. And if that's rescinded, maybe you can put that on the resume or in a cover letter, but even just one line, I was chosen for this. But that's a small exception.
Okay. So the next question, we've kind of been talking a little bit about this in terms of applicant tracking systems. We had a person asking, should they be concerned about the automated resume reading, the applicant tracking system, having certain kinds of formatting and font, and how much should that influence how they format and build their materials to apply for jobs? Can you answer that one to start us off, Wayne?
Sure. So we read left to right. We should write left to right. A resume should not have blocks in it. Like it should just be a Word document or a PDF. Just keep it simple. Because I see oftentimes, I got a resume a couple of days ago and the gentleman said, oh, you can't see this? I'm like, no, because it was in a table. So with regards to applicant tracking systems, I would suggest at least 10-point high font. Use whatever font you feel is appropriate for whatever you're in. Sometimes artistic people like to use something a little bit more artistic. I use just simple Times New Roman or Cambria, just something simple. But applicant tracking systems are so vast, so sophisticated. What you need to do is just keep your resume organized and clean and clear and simple and easy to traverse based on whatever applicant tracking system it may be. I've probably used 15 or 16 different applicant tracking systems in the last 20-something years, and they're literally all different and they look different. And I would suggest with regard, we already touched upon it, that content, don't oversell the buzzwords, but make sure they're in there. If you have a technical summary and you're using C++, Java, make sure that in the body of your resume, you're putting the operating system that I use, the programming languages, et cetera, so they're in it, it's in there a couple of times.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, as Wayne said, use a simple font, be careful of tables. We still see resumes with logos on them, and that really sort of messes up an applicant. It just comes across as a square block in a lot of applicant tracking systems. And I don't care if it's Coca-Cola or Dunkin' Donuts, the coolest companies in the world. Avoid using their logos because it wreaks havoc with applicant tracking systems.
Mm-hmm. Good point, Patty. Yep.
Okay. So now we have a few questions turning a little bit more towards job applications and work experience. So the question is, my graduation year is often required on a job application, and this ages me and opens me up to age discrimination. Is there a way that I can avoid this or better handle this? If you want to start us off, Wayne.
So I've been saying since I was 29 years old and I started in recruiting that just own up to it. Like, we all have our time. Age has never bothered me, and clearly I've cleaned up myself here. So I've never had a problem with age. I've never had a problem hiring people. I've literally hired people in their 70s for full-time jobs. But maybe I'm the minority. But I say own up to it. And if they ask what year, one example is whenever I'm going through a resume for a 90-day resume client, I'll say, sometimes their career will start off and it'll be senior manager 1991, and then they don't have the date on their resume. So I say, what year did you graduate? Because I can ask that legally. I can ask that as a representative of theirs. If I was an employer, I couldn't. So they're like, oh, I graduated in 1989, and I blah 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 blah. And I said, well, you're a senior manager in 1991 and you're only graduating in 89, somebody's going to assume maybe you graduated a lot earlier than that. So let's remove that doubt, because the way a recruiter reads a resume or a hiring manager reads a resume, they try and add some doubt, question some things. So if you can remove that doubt, and literally my resume still has my graduation date. And if people, clients don't like it, companies don't like it, then they don't deserve me. So what do you think, Patty?
Yeah, I totally agree. The other part of this that we sometimes don't talk about it comes up often with age discrimination, and what I've found is it's sometimes a candidate's price tag. So, sometimes a candidate will say, well, like we have a VP, posted right now on LinkedIn. I think we're asking for, I don't know, 10 to 15 years experience. And we're getting people, 30, sometimes 40 years experience. And when we have a conversation about compensation, they are looking for way beyond what our client is willing to pay. And so, I think especially in this job market, all of us have to be a little bit more flexible. But if you put a number down that is $75,000 more than what one of our clients are willing to pay, that's probably a factor that's going to eliminate you. So in some cases, it may not be your age, but it's sort of what your compensation ask is.
Okay, and to piggyback off of this one, we had a question come in through the box. What are your suggestions for job seekers who are 55 and older, and how to handle 30 plus years of experience in their resume without being eliminated right away for being overqualified? So it sounds like this person is interested in the role as it was advertised, but because their years of experience exceed what is the minimum qualifications on there, they're looking, they believe maybe they're being viewed as overqualified and therefore eliminated from being considered. How can someone handle that?
I would suggest, oftentimes people will put in their summary, what level they're at, or how many years of experience they have. And I don't like that at all. Like somebody say, oh, more than 20 years of experience. So if you're sending that, or more than 30 years of experience, if you're sending that to a manager who's 30 or 35 years old, he or she may say, well, this person's too old. But I mean, look, Patty and I haven't keeled over yet. We're in our, so I mean, we've still got plenty of gusto, and I'm sure Patty's had a 10-hour day before this. So, we know that we can still do it. I go back to the, age discrimination thing, which is simply, own up to it, do the best you can, but don't highlight the fact that you have so much experience. And if you could potentially tone it down, that's probably the best advice.
And I think focusing on how you can contribute. I mean, one way is your experience, but it's not always about 27 years of experience versus 19 years of experience. So, companies, what do they want to do? They want to attract customers. They want to sell. They want to increase revenue. They want to cut expenses. They want to engage employees. They want to build a community around their product or service. So, I mean, there's 5 or 6 things that companies almost universally do. So if you can, hit a few of those boxes in your summary, that is, in some cases, I would say many employers, more important than whether you have 27 or 22 or 17 years of experience.
And there are some positives to, being a little bit older, maybe not having kids in college, not having to be home for kids in school, not having to take full family benefits. So these are some of the things, depending on the role that you're applying to. If you're applying to a smaller company and you have, you're looking for full family benefits, that costs them an awful lot. If you're applying to, a larger company, it's not as much of an impact. So there's lots of ways you can use being somebody with a few years under your belt to your benefit. I don't have, kids I have to go to ball games for, or swim meets, or whatever it may be. Like, I can be a dedicated employee. So there's positives to it as well.
Okay. So the next question is kind of switching to the other side for people that are currently in school or who are building their experience. So for current students who had summer internship plans settled, and then COVID-19 happened and their plans are no longer as they once thought. and they're trying to build some work experience. What's a way to approach that? Patty?
So I've probably heard from, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 10, kids that are juniors or seniors that thought they had a job offer, and probably would have had a summer internship or a job offer if this pandemic had not hit. So the first thing I always suggest is stay in touch with that employer. If they thought you were wonderful, if they thought you were valuable, definitely stay in touch with the hiring manager. Ask them about working remote. And maybe it's not a full-time internship, or maybe it's not a full-time role, but is there a way that you can work for them remotely? Because a lot of companies have moved to remote work. I would also say that for sophomores and juniors that their summer internships have dried up, start networking. We still have time before companies have absolutely filled jobs. Talk to friends, talk to relatives, engage with the Alumni Association and the career events that you're running. And I think also some very, very industrious students are creating their own, what I would call micro internships. So they might be doing an internship for their public library for 5 hours, for their, mom's company for 5 hours, for, their summer baseball league for 5 hours. They're not getting paid, but they're getting valuable experience. And the pay thing stinks. We get that. Money's important, but they're building skills, number one, and they're building some good connections and potentially references for the future. The other thing I would suggest is there's this great website called COV Intern, and I think it's covintern.com, and it's an Indiana University student who has put together basically a free posting system for companies where they can post online and remote internships. So that's another resource that I know a lot of students are looking at.
Okay. Great. Yeah, it's good to have different resources and options. I would also say, too, that for current UMass students, the Career Services page has a link to Parker Dewey, and we're partnering with them, and they are virtual internships for the summer, and they are paid. So you can go and search those opportunities. So that's another resource as well. So a few more questions kind of piggybacking off of the newer professionals. So the question that came through is, how should I face age bias when I'm applying for jobs and I'm only 20 years old? So I've been told that I should only have a one-page resume, but I have quite a bit of different experiences, and how can I demonstrate my skill set and prove a high value point even though I am at a younger age?
So don't worry, even at 20 years old, I would suggest don't worry about a one-page resume. My oldest daughter got out of undergrad, had 2 jobs and an internship with FEMA, and I couldn't even keep her resume to one page. So if you've got the experience and it's organized, don't worry about one page. With regards to only being 20 years old, I know plenty of very intelligent 20-year-olds who could probably be running companies. So assume that somebody's out there and is going to see your value. Just keep plugging away. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, sometimes, most 20-year-olds would be okay with a one-page resume. There are exceptions to that rule. If they've, published anything, if they have, some experience like Wayne's daughter had, you can definitely go to 2 pages. That sort of old adage of the one-page resume is sort of like, the avocado green refrigerator, I think that we all had, in the 60s and 70s. So we don't have to sort of stay with that avocado green refrigerator anymore. But I think that, you know, really, I mean, I'll say it again, sort of companies want to hire talent and they want to solve problems, whether it's increase revenue, decrease expenses, get a product to market more quickly. So, I mean, I often distill it like, you know, it's buying a car. People want to see value. They're willing to pay a little bit more for something that makes their lives easier. So I think companies aren't that different. I think that companies want problem solved. They want someone to come in and increase revenue, cut expenses, get a you know, a problem solved, and they're willing to pay for that, pandemic or no pandemic.
Okay. So we've got quite a few questions. So I'm going to try to keep us moving along so we can get to as many as possible. So another question in terms of the resume is if they have smaller temporary length jobs that are maybe 1 to 2 months in length, should those be included on the resume?
I would simply say if they relate to the direction you want your career to go, absolutely. And if they're under your own business or, you know, consulting or on the side or part-time, group them together in your resume so they come out nice and clear. But absolutely, I mean, if it's I worked at a donut shop, you know, or something during Christmas break, and then I went back to school. I mean, that shows character. So absolutely, something like that should be on your resume. It doesn't have to be, you know, even more than, you know, 2 or 3 lines, but that you worked for a month or 2 at a donut shop, or, you know, there's character in there. So I absolutely suggest you keep it on until you graduate. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Patty.
And also in terms of for people that maybe spoke at events or if they were mentioned on certain web pages, should that be something that they include on a CV to bring to the employer's attention that they had those kinds of experiences?
I guess it depends, you know, I laugh about that because I guess it depends on how they were mentioned, right? So
right,
if they were mentioned, assuming, you know, I'm joking a little bit, but in a favorable light, especially if you're in marketing, PR, digital media, and you've gotten some media attention and you can include either links to that or a quote from that, I think that that's valuable.
Okay. We're going to switch a little bit over to cover letters and virtual interviews because we have a few questions on those, and I know we said we'd also mention that. So in terms of cover letters, the best way to organize the information that you should include in a cover letter, and if Wayne, you could start us off for that.
Sure. So cover letter, I've literally seen cover letters that are longer than people's resumes. And if your cover letter is too long, it's not going to get read. So I say brevity is bliss. You introduce yourself, you know, you let the company know where you found the job, and if you have the title, the reference, the requisition number, whatever it may be, and you let them know where you found it, that's nice. You're giving them some information about where their marketing efforts are being felt. So that's always good to introduce. And then you say, I believe I'm a great fit because, so, you know, where the summary and the objective on your resume is like a 15 or 20-second elevator pitch, this is a 30 to 45-second elevator pitch, if you will. And then you want to say, I believe I'm a great fit for this role because, and then use a couple of bullet points. And those bullet points should highlight some required skills, but also I say, if you have some of the desired skills. So if, again, I'll go to software engineering, somebody's looking for somebody with Java and C++, and it'd be great if you have XML or some sort of scripting, you know, that'd be just great to see. Well, make sure you put in your cover letter, oh, I have XML and scripting or whatever it may be. So I'm like, oh, wow, then they have that, then they must have the other stuff. And then, you know, simply thank you for your consideration and make sure your contact information is on the lower left-hand side. So if your cover letter gets printed off and separated from your resume, they know where to find you.
Okay. In terms of virtual interviews, Patty, could you offer some advice for someone going to a virtual interview? What should they be doing and preparing for?
So we are in the world of virtual interviews now. So a couple of quick suggestions. Try to do it in a quiet spot in your home. If you have, a basement or, a home office, it could even be a dining room table or a quiet spot in your living room or den. If possible, you want to minimize interruptions. Like I feel like the Amazon delivery person comes to our house almost daily. So I now have a sign on my front door that says just leave packages, because if I heard the doorbell one more time, I think I was gonna jump out of my skin. So I think minimizing interruptions, but I also think sort of doing a test run with, a friend or a relative, looking at, what's behind you. I find the virtual backgrounds very, very distracting if they're, a beach in Mexico, because I just, it's just odd for me, knowing that they're sitting in Somerville to have this beach in Mexico behind them. So, I think a reasonably, boring background is sort of what most are looking for. But I also think you want to make sure that you have good lighting, that you're comfortable with the software. I always say get up and running 10 minutes before. So if you have a 1 o'clock interview, sit down at your computer at 12:50, fire it up, make sure that the camera's working, make sure the audio is working, make sure that you have a good internet connection. And I think that you want to have a copy of your resume in front of you, and you don't want to minimize it and be that person that's sort of, running to the Zoom interview at and getting there at 1:02 and looking all flustered, because that's not a great feeling either.
Okay. So another question in terms of resources online. So what is a good website or resource to check out to look at salary data to be able to evaluate your value in the market?
So I know that I saw in the chat that you referenced Glassdoor, or Megan referenced Glassdoor.
Yep.
And I've seen that as well, and it can be skewed too high or too low. It's a good point of reference, but if you're applying for a project manager job and you make X amount and it says, X minus $10,000, I would not apply, because I've seen big titles with small salaries and vice versa. So so I would use it as a guide. But really, I mean, if you're speaking to classmates, former coworkers, maybe gauging their way, how you're doing, just I honestly, I don't know anything else other than Glassdoor online. But I mean, you can also look for jobs, and sometimes they'll say how much they pay, like even if you just do a search on Indeed or something like that.
You can definitely sort of Google it, and it's not always accurate, but it's information. I think Glassdoor, because it's self-reported data, skews high. I think you do have to look at the geographic region, the industry, the role, and the company size. Those are sort of 4 factors that we look at when we're benchmarking data. And I would ask people in your industry.
Okay. The other thing I would just mention too is if you're working, like for instance, if you work for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that's information that you can just Google and you can find how much people make, and you can look at their titles and things like that. So sometimes I know people have said, okay, I found a similar type role, maybe in a different state or at a different location. I also looked at Glassdoor, and then I kind of weighed all of that as different pieces of information, trying to balance and, got some kind of idea. So next question is, when you're interviewing, often there's that infamous question, tell me about a negative area or a growth area or something that you would change about yourself. How should you approach this kind of question?
I would say it's just such a kind of a lame question. I would almost laugh, and hopefully the person would laugh with me. But then again, I've got not much to lose with my career. People know me. But I mean, that's just such a horrible question these days. It's so 1980s. I don't know, Patty. I wouldn't even know how to answer that. What do you think?
Yeah, so we sometimes say, you know, what do you do well and what don't you do well? So they, you know, it sort of gives the candidate an opportunity to say what they do really well and what they don't do really well. I always respect a very candid answer because that's how my style is too. So I don't really do well at, you know, the pile of paper, you know, if you saw my desk over here, the pile of paper that I've sort of pushed to the side because I've been so involved in webinars or Zoom calls or client issues today. And then I sort of get through it, you know, on a quiet, you know, Friday morning. So I might give that as a, you know, weakness. But I think the most important thing is to sort of, you know, use that as an opportunity to sell your strengths and to describe why you're a good candidate for that role.
Okay. Looks like we've got another question, and then I think we might be out of time on questions in order for us to wrap everything up. So on LinkedIn, as most of us are familiar, you can search by school that people have attended. So you can search and you can find other people that went to UMass Amherst. Any tips on how to approach some of those people? So if I find someone who is also a UMass Amherst person and I say, gosh, they work at that company that I'm really interested in learning more about, what it's like to work there, thoughts on how to approach them and how to reach out to them?
First of all, I love that question because I have people approach me on LinkedIn all the time and say, I'm a UMass alum, I'm very interested in this, or you're connected with someone at this company. Now, candidly, I don't know all of my first connections intimately. I have about 7,000 connections, so I don't know everyone all that well. Some I know better than others, and if I have any influence and if I have any sort of true personal connection to any of those, you know, folks that they're trying to track down at a company, I'll say, I'd be happy to, you know, share a little bit about your, what you're looking for, the role you're looking for. I'd love to spend 15 minutes on the phone with you just to have a better sense of who you are. And I'd love to share your resume with, you know, Frank Smith at ABC Company.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. And I would suggest with, you know, just approaching anybody on LinkedIn as opposed to just hitting the connect button, unless you actually know them in real life. Make a comment, you know, introduce yourself. You know, direct is better and asking is perfectly fine.
Okay. One more question here now. In terms of when you're at the interview, when they ask you, are you being interviewed at other companies? What's that question really all about? It sounds like there might be more to it than just that question.
Of course, they're trying to see how active you are with your interviewing and how how quickly they have to move with either an offer or interviews. And then, you know, again, honesty is the best policy. I had candidates I asked earlier today, you know, where are you in your interview process? You know, are you just starting out? Are you only looking at an L? You know, are you at the offer stage? And, you know, everybody's different stages. So, you know, are you interviewing at other companies? If you are, yes, I am. I wouldn't necessarily share those companies. Yes,
Right.
I'm actively interviewing. Just leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is helpful because, and I'm sure Wayne has been in this situation, you don't want to present a candidate to your client that's expecting a job offer from another company like tomorrow. You want to sort of know that. So, you know, I think that helps with sort of building a relationship and sort of having that transparency about sort of where your client is with the interview, but also where your candidate is in the process with their search.
Great. So I think we are out of time on questions. So just to do a little bit of a final wrap up, we're going to pull up a slide that shows you the web address to go for more resources. So we have lots of different resources, such as Career Shift, where you can research different company information. You can also track information about your job search in there. There's Big Interview where you can practice interviewing. It'll actually give you interview questions, and then you can record it. You can share that with a friend or a career counselor or someone to look at it and figure out, did I say too many times, or were there other things that I was doing that was maybe distracting to the person that was interviewing me? You can go to that webpage at umassalumni.com/career, and that's where you can access all of those resources, including the video library for this webinar. So final thoughts that you have, Patty and Wayne, to kind of close us out on a positive note as people go out into this job search process. I know for many people, it can be quite tiring. And it can be a process that day to day is evolving, especially with the situation going on with different companies and decisions that they're making about hiring. It can affect those seeking jobs. So thoughts that you have?
I would say, first of all, companies, there are still some sectors that are hiring. Hospitality has been hit hard, hotels, restaurant, sort of a lot of consumer facing businesses that do sort of face-to-face, service businesses, especially, but companies are still hiring. I would say use this time to your advantage. Build up your LinkedIn profile, connect with me, connect with Wayne, use the resources available at UMass, and don't wait. Do not wait and sit on the sidelines and say, okay, our curve is going down in Massachusetts. Let me wait this out. Do not wait.
That's great advice, Patty. My final thought would be, don't feel like you have to make yourself stand out with your resume being so different. What actually stands out, and I've been saying this for decades, it's almost like the American Idol effect. The people who do well on American Idol are the people who go out there with a bit of humility and sing well. They're not the people who do a cartwheel, do a round off, stand up with, pom-poms in their hands. And that person will stand out, but not for the right reason. So to stand out as a candidate, a solid resume, organized, clean, clear, concise. It doesn't have to be special. It just has to be well thought out, and that's going to make you stand out. Level of professionalism as well. Simple follow-up, please and thank you. It goes a long way these days, because I have a lot of managers who tell me, find me somebody who's a good communicator. And Patty gave some great advice with regard to virtual interviewing. It absolutely makes sense. Be on time. Show respect, and just keep plugging. I mean, there's plenty of, we're hiring like crazy at NL, has not slowed down at all, and this too shall pass. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities out there. I wish everybody good luck.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Patty and Wayne, for your time and for being willing to answer so many questions, especially lots of questions that came in through the chat box, in addition to all of the questions that came in through the registrations for the webinar. So we just ask everybody as you go forth to just try to keep a positive outlook and keep moving ahead. We hope that maybe you'll connect with us on LinkedIn and you'll find us there, and you'll be able to see some other great resources and tips, because I know we're often posting things on there, as are other people as well. In the next day or so, you should be getting an email asking you to just give us some feedback on this session, what you liked and what you'd like to see in the future. So we are doing, through the beginning of June, we are doing one career session a week. So we'll be here next week with a different panel, and we'll be talking about networking. But check out all of our events at umassalumni.com/events to sign up for anything that interests you. Again, everything is free. It's open to alumni, students, and friends of UMass. So thank you, everybody, for your time. We hope you all can hang in there and keep moving forward. We wish you the best, and go UMass. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, take care. Thanks, everyone.